What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. Finally! We've got Cage on the show today from the Lukas Tigers and Brons Podcast. I had Andrew on a while back, which you can go check out there. And now that we have Cage, we've officially completed the Lukas Tigers and Brons podcast series on this channel. Remember at the end of 2021 when I said my goal for this channel was to get more people on the show for interviews that were kind of outside that wrestling card bubble and get their perspective on wrestling cards? Well, Cage is one of those guys, but I actually think Cage knows quite a bit more about wrestling and wrestling cards than many of the other hobby talking heads, content creators, and sports card collectors out there. Cage brings some fresh perspective that I think is going to open the eyes of a lot of the wrestling card community. We cover a lot of ground in this interview. We talk about a wrestling gimmick that could have been in the late 80s into the 90s. In fact, it may even still work in a promotion today if it was pulled off right. We talk about Wrestling All-Stars, WWE Prism. Putting those two together, you're sure to get some controversy, right? Content creation, and much more. But before we get into that conversation with Cage from the Lukas Tigers and Brons Podcast, just a reminder of some ways that you can help show your support for my content. The easiest thing you can do, and it's free, you're already here, hit that subscribe button. I'll give you a minute. Go ahead, hit it. And when you're done, give me a like. Like this video, like any of my other videos. Make sure to check those out as well. And of course, share this video and share this channel with a friend, with a sports card collector, with somebody that watches wrestling. Anybody you think that would enjoy this content, go ahead and share it to them. Put it on social media, tag them in it, tag me in it. Any kind of engagement to just keep the ball rolling on this channel. Make sure to check out the podcast I'm doing, Wrestling with Cards, the podcast. That's my solo podcast. I try to put one of those out every couple weeks or so. There's no set schedule on it. I've talked about that on previous videos and podcasts about why that's not a weekly show anymore. But it's available on all popular podcast platforms, so please seek it out. Share that podcast, the Wrestling with Cards podcast, with everybody you know that you think would be interested. And while you're there, subscribe and leave me that Dave Meltzer 5-star review. Make sure to check out the Worlds Collide podcast. Myself and Tony Vella from WrestlingTradingCards.com. Each week we're getting together to discuss you never know what in the world of wrestling cards, the hobby, maybe some outside of wrestling card bubble stuff, kind of like what we're going to talk about today that could kind of infiltrate wrestling and just help the wrestling card community learn and adapt. And of course, entertain, because you never know what we're going to say on there. Again, that one's available on all popular podcast platforms, so please just go out and search whatever you listen to podcasts on. Worlds Collide Wrestling Card Podcast. I'm sure you'll find it. If you do find it, which I hope you do, and I hope you give us the time, please hit that subscribe button, and again, leave us a review. If you want to help contribute to my content monetarily, first thing you can do is check out Wrestling with Cards on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of this video, like these fine supporters here. Here are some Patreon members that have been supporting me for quite a while, and I want to give them a shout out right now. And this could be you for as little as $1 a month. However, there are other tiers you can pay more and get more exclusive videos, exclusive content. Maybe I drop an eBay coupon in there. You never know what's going to happen in Patreon. But you won't want to miss out, so make sure to check that out. Links in the show notes. Also, while you're checking out the links in the show notes, there's also links to my eBay store, Beast Mode Collectibles. I've got cards for as little as $1.50 shipped. That's right, $1.50 out the door to your door. Not to mention there's other things, there's discounts that are built into the store. And again, all of that money, of course, it can go to help pay my bills, keeping the show going, and maybe buying some cool PC stuff to talk about on this channel. Or maybe a new camera, or lights, or all kinds of different things. There are a lot of costs that go into doing video content as well as audio content. You can check me out all over social media at Zhan Morning. And of course, there are links down below in the show notes to all the great things I've talked about. But there's another one. There's a donation link if you want to buy me a coffee, because I got to get up early to do these videos. I got to fit it into my schedule, and man, it's tough sometimes. Today, the donations have supported Bang Cotton Candy. That's right, we're starting it off with a bang.
Feel the bang! Christmas is coming!
Yeah, I know, that was kind of planned. Anyhow, everything I've talked about is in the show note links. Again, you can check that out. But let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Cage from Lukas Tigers and Brons. What's up? We finally got Cage on the show. Andrew first, so I'm sure you got to give us a hard time about getting him on first, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's my fault, I guess. It's not like you're not like you weren't asking me. So, maybe a lot of it is just my own vanity. I like to speak about stuff that I know about. And, I watched wrestling as a kid. I had Hulk Hogan rocking wrestling bed sheets on my twin size bed in the 80s. I know that, I know I liked Wendy Richter more than I liked the Fabulous Moolah, I definitely have video of me as a kid going USA, Canada. I know so I have that, but the cards itself, when I focus my card collection, it's not exactly wrestling. But we're here. I'll do what I can.
I think you're not giving yourself enough credit for being one of the. I'll call you guys the mainstream talking heads, because we're going to get into that in a minute. But one thing I know you guys told the story. You told the story was your amazing wrestling gimmick that I believe you came up with.
Yes, my dad.
You got to tell the story for everybody watching.
So my dad was a large individual, which is funny coming from me. I am the 6 foot. I mean, I'm down. I'm on a national diet. I'm trying to trim down for the national. But on April 24th, I was 294 pounds, almost 6'1". I stay 6 foot because I don't hit 6'1", and I don't like to cheat. So my younger brother is 6'7". My dad was 6'5". My dad actually played a few games for the New York Giants, nose tackle, big dude. And I remember we used to watch wrestling, and he and one of his other big friends, would like, we should wrestle. Like, we're huge. Like, we would, we're large and we should wrestle. And, back then wrestling was all about the gimmick. I mean, you take a look at the roster. The roster in the early 80s was just people's names. You know what I mean? Hogan came on. There weren't these like, it was Rocky Maivia. Like, there was a name. It wasn't the whole. And the gimmicks came. But before the gimmicks came, I remember my father's idea was, because they were large, but not exactly in shape. I mean, people don't realize that about wrestling. You got to be in shape. Even the big guys are in shape, right? But because they were large and not in shape, what they said was they were going to go and pitch the idea to the WWF at the time, right? WWE now. They would be the killer whales, right? And they would dress up like black and white, like orca suits, and they would be brought down by ring girls, whatever, like an entourage, in a huge tank of water, like think SeaWorld style, right? A rolling tank of water. And they'd be like throwing fish, into the tank, maybe throw some into the stands. That would be funny. People getting hit with fish as they're there to watch wrestling. And the gimmick was they had to win their matches quick. It had to be like a Goldberg spear, like a fast, it's over, even though what the hell's the spear do? So because they had to get back in the water. You know what I mean? Like, they had to match, but it had to be quick because they had to get back in, And I guess if finally, if you want to take away their win streak, beat them like, fish out of water, like, they're flopping around or whatever it was. I always thought that was funny. And then, immediately after that, you saw like Earthquake and Typhoon team up, and, I'm like, oh, there's two fat guys, like they're doing something, but never the killer whales.
It would have been perfect timing too, because right during that period you had like the Killer Bees, and then you had all these animal gimmicks like Frankie, and then Matilda the dog coming down. And
the British Bulldog. Frankie was what, Coco Beware, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. You had the snake, and then Ricky the Dragon had that kimono dragon. Like, it just keeps going with the animal gimmicks. So I think that would have worked out great.
Dude, you got all the animals down. I remember the Snake Pit with Jake Roberts, Jake the Snake. Yeah, man. I mean, that was a nice upgrade on Piper's Pit and the Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
Yeah, the barber shop. Yeah.
Yeah.
So see, you know more about wrestling than I think anybody gives you credit for.
As a kid, I just remember watching. I mean, that was what I watched. I watched
that's what drives it, though.
I remember my grandfather. We watched Saturday Wrestling was on like Channel 11, black and white television. And I'd say, who's wrestling? He'd say, oh, that's just one of the peanuts. That's what he call them. The guys, like the jobbers, he called them peanuts, right? And, every once in a while you'd catch a name that he'd be like, that's Ivan Putski, Polish Power. And I'm like, okay, Ivan Putski. Well, great. That's one of the Von Erichs. Okay, I'll watch those guys. They look good, It is what it is. The old school stuff.
Yep. And that's what I'm a big vintage wrestling card guy. I keep up with everything, but let's hear your backstory about wrestling cards, because I hear you drop these cards you either used to have or maybe you still do. And people are just like, whoa, did he just say that? And I don't think you get enough credit for your wrestling. Not like you're not out there saying you're an expert, but I think you know more about the cards and the sport than most people give you credit for.
I'll tell you, man, people will ask me what are some of my biggest losses. And I often fall into I don't really have losses, right? I have cards that I sold too soon, but I try to keep a good outlook as a card collector of trying to remember what I bought with those cards, with that money that I sold those cards for, right? Like, what did I do or what's the story? So back in, I don't even remember if it was 18 or 19, the card hobby was starting to percolate. but it was still mainstream. And I said, you know what? I mean, if the goats are going to pop, you got to look for real goats in these other industries. And I bought a Pele card and soccer, and I started looking for, cards of old time GOAT wrestlers. And people don't realize this. The first guest we ever had on the show, we've had as of yesterday, I think 720 episodes of Lukas Tigers and Brons, one a day. We're a couple weeks away from, starting year 3 of this with a show every single day. I asked our first guest on, it was David Peck, 1982 Wrestling All-Stars. That was our first guest on the show, because I used to talk to, Peck on Twitter all the time, wrestling cards, you name it, the whole deal. And I remember him from his crazy blowout forum posts.
Yeah.
I don't know if you,
yeah.
I mean,
I'm familiar.
Right. So in wrestling, what I went out and I wanted a Hogan, but I just could never find one. And also at the time, I was a little bit of a 10 snob. Let's just say that, right? And I'm pretty sure that there is no 82 Wrestling All-Star Hogan 10.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
So that was part of why I never grabbed a Hogan. Regrets, obviously. I could have bought, like a Cosmos or like a, like they call it Popey.
Mm-hmm.
I probably say that wrong. But I bought 2 cards in the same PWCC auction, the same one. And I paid the same price for both of them, believe it or not. It was $2,551 per card. And the 2 cards I bought were the 1973 Wrestling All-Stars Andre the Giant and PSA 10, the one with the little electrical outlet between his legs, and an 82 Wrestling All-Star Ric Flair PSA 10, which I think the pop count says 6, but there's really only 5 of them out there.
One of them
there was a
crack.
Yeah, exactly. There's a little cracky switcheroo on it. So there really was only 5. So I had one of the 5. Those started going up a bit, and I was looking to get into more mainstream sports. The 2 people I sold them to still have them.
Nice.
I can go into it if you like. The Andre was a hell of a story, man. The Andre, I started getting into some Pokemon cards also, and I started talking to Jeremy Padower, who is Jazz Wears Toys. I don't know if you guys know him. He knows the Pokemon brand. He knows the whole deal, and he wanted the Andre. I sold him the Andre. I don't even think I doubled up on my money. I can only imagine what a 10 is on the Andre now. But I think it was, 4 or 5 thousand, probably like double what I paid, which was great because it was only a couple months later and you didn't know cards were going to 100x.
Yeah.
Nobody knew.
Especially those kind of wrestling cards.
Yeah. So, wrestling wasn't like a mainstream. And I remember I sold it to him, and it was at the time, I don't know if you remember this, it was pre-COVID, but before COVID, the post office was having like all kinds of issues, mailing things out. Like things were taking like months to get there. So I sold him the card. He came on the show. He was a guest on the show. We talked about Pokemon, and I had him back on the show. Like it literally took like 2 months for it to get there. And it eventually arrived. To Jeremy's credit, like real awesome. I wish everybody had a buying, selling experience like what I had with Jeremy. He's like, it'll get here. I know, I trust you. I know it'll get here and get, the post office is what it is. I mean, obviously if it didn't get there, I would have refunded him. So maybe it really didn't have too much to worry about. He's like, it'll get here. And it did, it got there. So he has that card. The Ric Flair, I sold, that one I got a little more for because I held on to that one a little bit longer. And I got a Klay Thompson 2012 Prism PSA 10 that was worth it was about $1,000 at the time. But I sold that Klay to Gary V for $85. I sold him 17 of them for $85. They went up over $1,000. So I didn't keep one, so I wanted one back. So I sold the Ric Flair to Gary V, and I got cash and that Klay, which I sold. So, but again, probably more than twice what I paid, less than triple. So somewhere in that $5,000 to $7,000 range for that card, which I can only imagine what a Flair 10, because Flair 9 sell for more than that.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine. But I mean, the money I used to buy a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar rookie card in 8.5 for 14 that I sold a couple months later for 80. So, I mean, you have to, it sucks that I don't have those cards. And I wish I was a millionaire. I wish I was, much more, better off from a money perspective, because then I wouldn't have had to sold those. I could have bought the Kareem and still had those and had, I could have been, but I'm more of somebody who is consistently like, all right, if I could take some profit and move it into something else, always trying to color up. And over the last year, it's kind of served me well because I'm not really stuck with any of like the smaller stuff. I mean, those two cards I just named, no one would be stuck with those. But, you know, the prisms and the silvers and the whole deal, which the wrestling community is getting a taste of now.
Right.
You know, that stuff, I kind of colored all that up because I'm always constantly churning the collection, always moving into something else. But yeah, those were the two.
To be honest, like, even though I'm a diehard wrestling fan, you know, a Kareem card if you're looking to sell something, it's going to appeal to a lot more people long term than wrestling. But that kind of is a good transition. What do you think about wrestling cards right now? And you can take it wherever you want. We've seen the Prism release, which I'm pretty sure Panini turned on the printing presses for that one, and since they've already lost the license, we've seen huge gains in vintage. Like, what do you think about wrestling cards right now, in your opinion, just in general?
Sure. So, I mean, when wrestling started getting hot, you know, I had a unique perspective on it, the same way I do about F1 and a bunch of other things that go through a price discovery. Because, I mean, my name is Cage Lawyer. That's what they, you know, that is because I collected UFC cards almost from the very beginning of UFC. So I watched. That's more of like a modern. People don't realize there's an older, you know, segment of UFC cards also. You know, there's Pride cards from Japan. You know, there are older cards out there. But starting in 2009, that's when Topps got the license for UFC. They turned the machines on a little slow, right? It was a little slow, sort of like Topps had wrestling when Prism explosion. You know what I mean? Prism was crazy. But I saw that with Topps. 2009, there was round 1, round 2. Then eventually main event, Topps round 4, the 4th release, which came out in like late 10, early 11. I think they might still be printing it. And that's what happens. And it happens on all of these products. You're going to see it happen with the F1 products if you don't see it already starting to happen. And you saw it happen with the Prism products. Now, you know, just, you know, there's a market for it, and they keep their foot on the pedal. So what do I think about wrestling cards? I think you got to be careful with a lot of the modern stuff. Yes, there's a market for shiny. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And we'll split it up into two. We'll talk about modern. We'll talk about some vintage. Some of the vintage stuff that's out there, I would say to people to be careful about, because I noticed a run-up in vintage in other sports, but what remained high and what is proving to stay high and or increase in value during softer times are not cards that are scarce because of the grade. It's cards that are scarce because they're scarce. It's cards that are rare because they're rare. And the 82 Wrestling All-Star set is not exactly a rare set. I know they're, you know, it's not printed like Topps, right? But it's not exactly the rarest set in the world.
Yeah, there's believed to be like 2,000 or less sets. Period.
You know what I would compare it to? I compare it to the star cards for basketball. You know, it was sort of one of these like regional kind of like, you know, the wrestling one was a mail-in a magazine, right? You know, like, okay, I'll mail it, the whole deal. So even 2000 is not a huge print run. I would have a feeling there's a little more than that. And I'll bet you there are a couple of them more being slabbed, because you know what happens with the star set, and I think with the wrestling, it's a lot of fakes. Yeah. And in the beginning, a lot of those grades, the fakes were graded, I think. I think there's probably a lot of fake ones in the slabs because of the card stock, the way it's made, the coloring on it. It's not the most difficult card to fake if you have the ability to do that stuff. And that's not just wrestling. I'm not just shitting on the 82 Wrestling All-Stars. You know, pull up a blowout forum, you know, or pull out, you know, any kind of thread about the star cards, and you'll see the reason why PSA didn't grade them, although I've heard that might be changing soon, is that they just couldn't figure out which ones were fake and which ones were real. You know what I mean? So I'm a little wary about that. The one segment that gives me the most concern about wrestling is the vintage autograph cards of people who are still alive. So I see people paying crazy amount of money for like an 82 Wrestling All-Star of Hogan, right? It's slabbed, it's authenticated, it's a cool one with Hogan's auto. All right, but on Twitter, I just saw some dude, you know, post 9 that he got signed yesterday in Hogan's place in Florida. Yeah. You know what I mean? So obviously those will probably find their way, some of them into slabs, and a card that you thought, okay, wow, there's probably only 50 or 100 of these, you know, and look at the grades and we look at the pop, and now they're paying for thousands. All of a sudden, 1 or 2 more come in. And the kind of pricing that we're seeing on some of these rarities, especially those, once more come in, it makes it a little more interesting on pricing, right? The price usually finds a way to trickle down. The second segment, besides the signed, that I would be, I don't want to say concerned about, but what I'd watch out for is I wouldn't be buying at top dollar mid-grade of the 82 Wrestling All-Stars or any of the other wrestling stuff, right? So like PSA 6s, 5s, even 7s. Because there are a lot of wrestling fans out there that didn't care about grading. They just had the cards. They thought they were cool, and they still had them. And a lot of people are holding them for a couple reasons. Number one, they didn't think that they would grade a 9 or a 10. And prior to last year, it wasn't worth grading to get a 6. Right? But now, even 6s and 7s are selling for a pretty hefty price. I think a lot of that is because people didn't send them in for 2 reasons. One, they didn't want to send in a thing that wasn't a 9 or a 10. But 2, you weren't sending them in because PSA was closed. It was like $300 to grade a card. Now at $30 or if PSA comes down in price, I think you're going to see more of those cards either cracked over from other slabs or people who have them raw and see them start to grade. That's my thoughts on vintage. On the modern stuff, I hope people didn't get burned too badly with the pricing, because I almost feel bad for the wrestling card community, right? Because they were used to a certain way, right? They were used to the pricing. And it's out there and it's a price and this is what it's sold for and the whole deal. I don't think a lot of them were ready for the whole couple first week Prism rush. We're like, wow, this card's out there. It's, a Bron breaker is, $150 for a base. But you don't understand that there's probably 40,000 of those, 50,000 of those cards that can't sustain that price. And then all of a sudden you just see it kind of, just drop off on you. I hope people didn't get burned, because what I was hoping for with, Panini coming into the market and doing wrestling cards was that it allowed more people to collect. Not everybody is grabbing an 82 Wrestling All-Star. Not everybody bought the Topps cards, right? But with a new release, people are able to get the cards, the new cards, you name it. But if you have wrestling fans now who weren't into cards and you were hoping to kind of grow the base, to grow the, that user base, right, of wrestling collectors, and they come in and they spend all this money and they buy a silver of The Rock, and all of a sudden they're at a 90% loss. They buy the Undertaker. People told me they bought John Cena, but I couldn't see him on any of the cards. But I mean, the prices came down a lot. Look at the color blast. And then for the first time, because the wrestling card community is pretty tight knit. When one of those 82 in high grade comes up for sale, everybody kind of knows who's selling it. You know what I mean? Like, whose it is. There's a lot of talk about it. Not so much with like the Prism Color Blast. They got posted, they got put up there, and then it sold for a price, but did it really sell? This was the first taste for like the wrestling card community to get a piece of like the shill bidding and just the craziness that goes on. And I hope it didn't leave a bad taste in the mouth of like new entrants, because that would suck. You need new blood, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, so some talking points that you just mentioned. I'll go back to the 82 All-Star stuff and the idea of that, there might be some of that starting to come out. And I agree with you. But on the flip side, one thing that I would argue that the wrestling card, and this is coming from a perspective of trying to buy some of the stuff, I can't get a hold of some of it because the wrestling card community is a bunch of hoarders. They don't do like what me and you do as far as coloring up and trying to, have a self-sustaining hobby. So what do you think of that? Like, because, trying to get a hold of some of even stuff that's, go back to the All-Stars. Like, I'm trying to put together a complete autograph set because I've got the whole set, and now I'm just trying to upgrade those to signed copies, and I don't care so much about the grade. I just want them authenticated. But even trying to find some of these mid to low tier names or jobbers in that set. So I know people that have them, and they're not letting them go. So what do you think about that?
I mean, that's an interesting thing, right? I mean, that people do that with other sets. People do autographs. The autograph thing is a completely different animal, right? I mean, that's a real collector thing. And I as far as sets, how many you can estimate, how many sets do you think are out there that are autographed? I don't think there's one. I think there's probably one guy that's like 5 or 10 away. You know what I mean? And then there's a couple of them that are 20 away. And that becomes sort of like a chase for you guys, right? That's I think a completely different animal. You know what I mean? Like the autographed sets, that's not, most people who are coming in the hobby now are not going to want that. They're not, they want autographs that are pack pulled.
Yeah.
Instead of autographs that
and that's another thing with wrestling is some of the independent cards we're seeing that they sell at the shows and then they can get signed by the wrestlers right now. We're seeing those slabbed and PSA authenticated, and they're going for a couple $100 off of, a year ago that was a $1 card. So it's another interesting thing that wrestling has that a lot of other sports and other collectibles don't, is they love the hand sign stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also because, listen, that could change, right? Depending upon, what happens going forward on the cards and whether or not they start to get autographs for different folks. But people now learn from, look, the 82 Wrestling All-Stars hand signed. That's the only way to get autographs on those cards.
Right. Yeah.
So people are like, you know what? Let me get this card of this guy now before he's not signing that card anymore. You know what I mean? So even if I have to pay $100, it's better than trying to chase down, a fabulous Moolah auto, on an All-Star card or whoever it's going to be. I mean, she might be in the 83 set. But was she an A, B? I have no idea.
I don't remember, but yeah, she's in there.
She's in there somewhere, right? But for however much someone needs to charge you for that, right? Or maybe 3 people have those.
Right.
Whereas now it's like, oh, let me get it before it becomes large. I think what happens with that though is, it almost starts to devalue it. Plus, I think you're going to see Prism's going to have everybody sign. They got the NXT guys. They got everybody in it. I mean, I opened up one box of Prism myself, and my best card was a teal out of 49 of Julius Creed. And I was like, Apollo Creed? Like, who is this guy? I don't know who this was, right? I think I sold it on Whatnot last week for like $6.
Yeah, that's about the going rate for something like that. Yeah.
Slabbed in an SGC. I was like, all right, there you go. I had a lot of 6 SGC graded cards. I think I had like that Creed was in there. I had a Kevin Owens blue out of 199, graded 9. Couple Braun Breakers and a couple of Gable Stevensons, and the whole lot of 6 got like I think like $22 or $27. I was like, what the hell happened to this stuff?
And that's a good transition too. You talked about having David Peck on as one of your first guests, and he has been really talking on Twitter about how Prism has been a pump and dump. So kind of transitioning to the modern discussion. I was always of the belief that the Prism golds, the white sparkles, the black 101, like the really rare stuff is going to just keep going up slowly for these wrestling cards. And it was going to basically put these new ceilings or new, I guess, floors on some of this rare wrestling stuff. And David says he thinks it's been the biggest pump and dump that he's ever seen. So where do you fall on that sign?
I agree with both of you because you're looking at it differently, right? You're looking at it with an eye towards someone who knows about the history of Prism and knows that in 2012, people were not paying thousands of dollars for any cards, not the golds, not anything, right? LeBron Prism Gold was not what it is now. You saw some Prism Golds, and in Golden's auction this past week, I mean, like a PSA 8 George Mikan was 4 figures. He hadn't played for 65 years. You know what I mean? It was a hideous card, not in good shape, off-centered. It doesn't matter. It's gold, right? And people will pay for that. I think what Peck's talking about, and he's correct, is, there's a very big difference between the old wrestling cards and the new from a base, silver, non-numbered, Ruby Wave, you name it, the whole deal. And the biggest difference is, especially with gatekeepers like Peck and what's the other dude's name? David England? Is that his name? Robert England?
Yeah.
Rob England? Is it the same name as Freddy Krueger, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So, sorry, Robert, I'm not trying to insult you, but I mean, I call you David England, I call you whatever, because I don't want to call you Freddy Krueger. But I mean, there are guys like that who basically have the pop report memorized of wrestling cards because because not a lot of stuff out there. So, somebody posts a picture on Twitter and says, Dave Peck, what's this worth? He says, all right, there's 9 of these. There's 27 of these. The Carnation is this. This has got the greenback, and there's only 2 of those in the pop report. This is really good. Like you have that, right? You can't do that for Prism based, silver, unnumbered, parallels, the whole deal. So people originally assigned that type of like limited stuff to the non-limited cards in Prism. And I think what you're seeing now is, I think you're seeing the pendulum swing the other direction. And some of the better cards are actually being punished by the overall macroeconomic picture of the world, you name it. But like, there's a Hogan auto in there, like red, what's the red out of 49, 99, whatever it is. And it's a really cool looking Hogan auto. What I mean? It's not the only Hogan auto, right? But there's the Rock, there's black, 1 of 1, there's golds, you name it. Eventually, there will be enough people collecting wrestling that they go back and they realize there's only 10 of that. And there'll be 10 next year when they do the second series, and 10 the year after. There's only 10 Undertakers. There's only 10, Alexa Bliss with her weird puppet thing. I don't know what the hell that is. But, people will collect those. And I think if you just say Prism is a pump and dump, you might actually throw out the baby with the bathwater. I've been saying this a lot lately on the show because and this is what happens. And that's where smart people, people who have an eye on this will be able to, I think like you're doing, probably pick up some of those You know what's rare in Prism because it's numbered. Imagine if the 82 Wrestling All-Star set, let's just say there's 3,000 sets. Let's just use that. But imagine if there was a gold version of Andre and Hogan and Ric Flair, and it was numbered to 10.
Yeah, it'd be nuts.
People would go crazy for those.
Yeah.
And you would go crazy for it, not because it's one of the 5 PSA 10s, not because it's one of a dozen, BGS 95s. It's because there's only 10 of them, right? And you probably know there's more than 10 wrestling lunatics out there who are going to want those cards. Right now, Tech, the purists, those guys don't like Prism because you paint with a huge broad stroke. All Prism is bad. It's a pump and dump. It's bullshit. And I understand where that's coming from because the color blast was supposed to be like case hits and rare. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows how rare those are. Maybe next year they'll do Kaboom. It'll be the same thing. No one knows how rare it is. But the numbered stuff, the gold, the black, those cards, how many of them are out there. And when you start to factor in, even nobody cares about teal, but like the teal Julius Creed, if he turns into like a huge champ, there's 49 of them. Somebody got a steal and whatnot last week, buying my card for $6. Those are a different category. And right now, nobody's making that split. You got the U who says Prism will be fine. You got the Peck that says Prism is a pump and dump. What you need is somebody in the middle, Cage, it's my ultimate warrior on here, to say you could both be right, but there is a lane to drive through where you're both right, and not all of Prism gets thrown in the garbage.
Right.
Make sense?
Yep. And you mentioned something about more people that are going to be collecting wrestling cards. And I think that's a good transition. What do you think it's going to take to get more people into wrestling cards? And I'm talking wrestling fans and the outsiders, somebody that's maybe, we've seen people that run in your circles, you guys with the sports cards, that they're not wrestling card collectors, but the next thing you know, they're buying something from Hogan or The Rock because they connect with it and they want it in their PC. And I can say that AEW with their Upper Deck product, everybody can say what they want about that. It really got a lot of new people into the product, and even base cards. Like I sell a ton of base cards there's just new people that didn't even know wrestling cards existed. So overall, what do you think it's going to take to get more people into this space? Man.
Right now, wrestling, I love it, and I love AEW. And what you can see is that wrestling has that groundswell. It has those, the folks in who collect it who really love it. Right. That's why I'm not surprised at AEW, which I think your collectibles, the toys, that kind of stuff is Jeremy Padal.
Yeah,
it's funny
is.
how it's all connected, right? What's it, Orange Cassidy, right? You get the whole deal, right? So it wouldn't surprise me that something like that does well because it's going to be, wrestling fans who don't know about the cards. Imagine it back in the day when I was a kid, if Rob Van Dam had a card, he was the whole effing show, man. But people who were fans of wrestling would go after that, right? So I think you're always going to have it with wrestling. What you need, time. Nobody likes to hear this, but you need time. Because right now, what you're seeing is the card people like myself who get into it, they're the ones who are buying the Topps Chrome Rock out of 50, or Taker, or John Cena, or, those just gold, the stuff that has worked in the other sports.
Right.
Because what they're hoping for is that the Prism golds catch on, they start to go up in value, and all of a sudden the gold cards go up in value and they could flip them. And they could drop them on somebody else, and it's one of these, like zero-sum game, right? It's like, oh yeah, the kind of thing that Peck hates. I saw it happen in UFC when Prism came out for UFC cards. Mm-hmm. The Topps Chrome stuff for Connor and the rest of the guys started, following out of 50 gold, you name it, the whole deal. But most of the people who were buying that were speculating on it, and they were just buying it to hope to sell it to somebody else at a higher price, which does not bode well for the longevity. But that's the way cards are. You know what I mean? You want to get more people in the cards. That's the way cards are. The only other thing I'll tell you is, to see like Zac Efron doing a Von Erich documentary.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like those are things that do matter in sports because it's not always a recipe for success, right? Sometimes the pump ahead of time, sometimes, it's buy the rumor, sell the news type of thing. And I got to tell you, if I were a collector of Von Erich cards, I'd probably be selling them all right now. I'd be selling them on the news that documentary is coming out. Because not everything has a last dance type of, like, we're all locked up in our houses watching Michael Jordan and the cards are going to go up, while the documentary's on. Most things you see a little bit of a pump before the documentary, and then it goes down. You saw the Lakers stuff, Tom Brady stuff. I mean, so I think when it was announced, you probably would see the little bit of a spike. I think if you're holding it, hoping that when that Von Erich documentary comes out, all of a sudden everyone's going to be looking for their cards, maybe a little here and there, but there already have been a run up on them, I think. But that's helpful. I mean, those type of documentaries, that's more mainstream stuff, get people to understand the movies. I think that if that was Fighting with My Family, like if that came out now with like Prism mainstream stuff, that would be a different story, right? What was that Paige? That was like her story, right?
Yep.
So, if that came out now, that would be a different story. But then there will be another one.
Right.
You know what I mean? The Rock will run for president. There'll always be something that, that'll bring it back. What I think it needs, what could keep people in the wrestling cards is once the Prism crap fizzles down, there aren't a lot of segments in the hobby. I'll just use that broad stroke, any kind of cardboard, right? Where you have the OGs who are just well-established and known and universally respected. Baseball cards, there are people who know it, but people hate them. There are people who know it, but people say, "Oh, I know it better than them." Basketball, same thing. Oh, I'm in this camp. I'm in the PMG camp. I'm in that. But in wrestling, it's like, oh, let's all bow down to Freddy Krueger and David Peck. You know what I mean? Like we all know there. The things, and that's actually, I think, a good thing, right? Because it could maybe carve a niche for wrestling where like you guys are all kind of looking out for each other and not trying to burn each other, not trying to buy something just to dump it on somebody's head for a higher price. And maybe that's a cool place for people who really want to collect to be. Plus, you got the growing, craziness of wrestling, right? I mean, wrestling's not getting any smaller,
right?
So
yes, you mentioned Jeremy Padawer. This is a good thing. We'll move on to something else after this, but I'm not sure if you're familiar. The wrestling figure collecting community is like massive. So Jazzwares did a certain line where they put packs of yellow paralleled cards, the same AEW base cards, but they'd had the yellow parallels, and the only way you could put the set together was to buy the figures and get the cards out. A lot of the figure hunters, I don't even think were aware of wrestling cards until they saw those.
I mean, it's very smart.
Yeah.
I mean, and that happens when there are booms. In the 80s, when cards got big, starting lineups were also big.
Yeah.
And they had cards in them. Kenner, I think, made the the starting lineup, and they had Michael Jordan starting lineup cards. Kareem had cards in there. But yeah, they're smart. I mean, Jeremy's very smart. He's in the Omi, the Vive stuff. He's fully aware of like mystery packs and random insertion. Like you name it. So they know what they're doing, and all that stuff helps. All that stuff brings brand awareness to the cards, to the hobby, you name it. So I didn't know that was being done. That's a cool idea. I know the figures are huge. I still have mine. I still have my, I don't know, what were they? It's not Jax. I forget what the big wrestling guys. I got
the LJN, the rubber.
LJN, yeah, the rubber ones. I still have mine. I got a, my Junkyard Dog. It's missing the chain. I got an Iron Sheik. That was the best because his arm was like permanent like this, so he could drop him on people and he would hit him. I got a Hogan. I got a bunch. I mean, I got Sergeant Slaughter, Paul Orndorff. He was just nuts. That guy had like a 47 pack, going on. But I have that, Mr. Wonderful. Yeah, man, I still have him somewhere. In the house. You can see him too. I think when I interviewed Jeremy, maybe for the first time, I had like a backdrop of like my Pokemon cards and my wrestling figures. Big John Studd was there. It was like whole deal, fun stuff.
I used to buy a lot of them, but I ended up getting rid of those and actually putting that money into cards because it's just easier to store them.
Well, I mean, that is one of the things that cards has over almost everything else.
Right.
You know what I mean? People I collect posters. I collect, CDs. I collect that. I mean, the stackability. Like, look, I'm going on Whatnot in an hour after we record. And I mean, like, that's what I'm selling. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world. I mean, it's all stacked slabs. Got my Kobe, game used stuff. Just it's easy, easy to move, easy to ship, easy to sell. So, and UFC, when I started doing that, what people collected in UFC? This is funny, man. Like I wish I kept some of them. I still have a few, but I think the portability or lack thereof is what stopped this from being a collectible. Think about this. I mean, imagine the WWE did this. I forget when the UFC started doing this, because they didn't do it for like the SEG era, before Dana White bought it, but maybe like UFC 40 something like that, maybe even before that, at the events, at the weigh-in when they're doing like the pressers, they have everyone on the fight card sign a poster, right? And then the UFC sells those posters limited to 150 copies signed by every fighter on the card. When they sell out, obviously, you have to be live there. It's not like online or anything like that. And 150 of them done, autographed total posters. And think of some of like the major events like UFC 100 with like Brock Lesnar as the headliner, or UFC. Like that's a limited, autographed poster to 150. I mean, that's pretty nuts. But people don't collect them. I got a bunch in my basement because they're just in rolls. Like I don't display them. Because to display something like that, look, here you go. I'll display a card. There's Luka. Easy. Yeah. I display a poster. I gotta like frame it and like hang it up and stuff. I think that's one of the things cards has going for it.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about content. You and Andrew, you guys are pretty much the kings of content, I'm going to say at this point, and such a variety, hitting us every single day with new episodes. So before we talk about your show, I want to know what your opinion is, and this is something that's like a thorn in my side, is all these mainstream hobby talking heads, not you guys, because we'll get to that in a minute. Nobody gives wrestling any credit. They want to talk about the most fringe things you could possibly pull out of the hobby, but yet we'll have a record-breaking sale for a rock card or something else, and they're like, okay, this sold for this, but okay, let's go talk about this, or go talk about Pokemon or F1 or 10. Like, why do you think that wrestling doesn't get more credit in the mainstream hobby as far as like content creation goes?
I mean, it is a great it's a great question. I go 5 or 8 different ways on why. so it shouldn't be a surprise that it doesn't happen. Number one, it's ease of use, right? So most talking heads, they're going to go where everybody else goes because it's easy. Most people will talk about it because they see it pop up on their Instagram timeline. Oh, there's a record price of this. Oh, look at this F1 card. Oh, this 1 of Lewis Hamilton. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm on Instagram all the time because I got to answer all my questions. Very rarely do I see anybody posting about wrestling cards or record sale or you name it. Very rarely at all. I think a lot of it is because Twitter seems to be the place where the wrestling guys go, which is weird because the wrestling guys like to talk and Twitter limits your amount of characters. So come on over to IG, guys. Come on over. But I will tell you this. All you would need is one person to make it easy. Talk about like, there are people out there who love the hobby, love wrestling cards, you name it. How about this for a little like niche, a place to make some success? Take a look at what like Slab Stocks does, right? And they do a whole like, this is what this sold for last year. This is what this sold for now. Use the card ladder price, whatever the hell it is. And they make a little tile. People repost that shit because it's easy. People just, oh, I'm using the slabs. Look what they did. Here's a record sale. This was in Golden last night. This was in that, blah, blah, blah. If somebody in the wrestling world wanted to be that and say, okay, this is what this Andre sold for last August. This is what it sold for now. It's up 20% or whatever. That would then get reposted because this is what a lot of the talking heads do. They just look for that easily clippable, repostable, content. But wrestling, you have to look for it because there's nobody doing that. For me to talk about like a record sale of The Rock, first I'd have to know about it. 2, then I'd have to go back and find. But if you every week were sending me and 5 other people, hey, by the way, look at this. This thing sold for this last year, and it's gone. There's only 10 of them, or whatever it is. People would post that, but people are inherently lazy. They look for an easy way to do stuff, and wrestling, you kind of have to look for it to post. You kind of have to do a little work. So that's part of the reason. The next part, and this is going to be a little more controversial, right? Because I don't know whether or not you know this. The wrestling's fake. Okay, I don't know whether or not
you just killed it for me.
That was true. I don't want to like burst your childhood bubble, right? But like, Corporal Kirshner was not really in the army that I know of. You know what I mean? Like, the camel clutch, I don't know if it hurts as much as everybody said it did. I mean, like, Diamond Dallas Page actually happens to be a very nice guy. He's not the killer. But you think, I mean, Leapin' Lanny Poffo was a weird name. Anyway, so I could just go
we could just keep going. Yeah.
Point is, that's a Staten Island guy too. So that is the Poffo family. Used to see him at the pizzeria. So it's fake. A lot of what this hobby boom was built on was a comparison of the cards to the stock market, comparison of the assets to the stock market, and or fantasy sports. And I think part of what may hold wrestling back, and I don't know if this has ever been said before, I've never heard it. So if someone said it, I'm not stealing it from you. I'll give you credit. But part of what I think holds wrestling back is people love to be right. People love to be like, oh, I was on Giannis in 2014 and I held his stuff because I knew he was going to blow up and become a champ and a great player. And I was right 5 years in there. And sure, you could do that with wrestling cards, right? You can be on a guy when they're in NXT.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could be on, Sin Cara or whoever it is that's going, oh, wow, look at that guy's going to be awesome. He's flying all over the place, but, and then they turn it to something good. You're like, I knew it. Like, I knew that guy was going to be huge. But chances are, so does everyone, because wrestling is, it's scripted, and you're picking it. Okay, well, you kind of know where we're going. You know what I mean? So the big rookies, okay. I mean, they're big rookies because they're being groomed to be the champ.
Right.
Braun Breaker has some lineage. We all know who the Hart family, people are. So it's less likely for you to find that diamond in a rough. Okay, I'm gonna buy this person's cards and I'll buy Dame Lillard in the bubble and watch him score 40 points 10 straight games. That wasn't scripted. I could sell their cards. So wrestling is sort of missing a little bit of that. I'm sure there are wrestling fans who would disagree with me and they would say, you know what, if I bought Paige cards before she got that call up and then boom, she won. And you're like, wow, that came out of nowhere too. Like I could have called that, I'm sure there are some, correlations that can be made, but I think what holds it back from mainstream is that people are like, why would I buy that? I don't bet on fixed horse races. And, I don't. So, I mean, that's kind of maybe one of the reasons why it doesn't get talked about as much. I could be completely off base.
That makes sense. My only argument that I've been saying is how are we any different than Pokemon? Because it's all character driven.
Very true. So that's very true. I think the difference with Pokemon is a couple-fold. Number one, playable game. Number two, the nostalgia is there for Pokemon, the older cards, the same way that sort of nostalgia is there for the 82 stuff. But most wrestling fans didn't know about the 82 All-Star set.
It's true.
I told you, I watch wrestling all the time. I was as big a Hogan fan, the 24 Pythons, I meet my vitamins, Hulkamaniacs, I was that kid with the, Rock and Wrestling and JYD and, the whole deal, right? But I didn't know wrestling all-star cards existed, but everybody who did Pokemon played the Pokemon game. And while wrestling is a brand that is iconic, WWE is a huge brand. It's a huge moneymaker. Take a look at how much Pokemon is worth.
Yeah.
It's a very different comparison. It's a very different world. Also, I would say Pokemon's pretty big in Asia. I'm not 100% sure, how good of a job the McMahon family has done making inroads in Asia yet. Wrestling was huge there. I mean, listen, that's where Hogan kind of, before he was, what was he, the Boulder?
Terry Boulder.
Her Boulder. Japan is where it starts with Inoki and the whole deal, right? But I don't know whether or not you have the Asian market, the way they collect Pokemon and they collect basketball, if they're collecting, Bron Breaker's cards or anything like that. So that's a little bit of the difference with Pokemon. But yeah, I can understand what you're saying. Charizard's not. It's entertainment driven. Wrestling, I think it kind of it has this weird hybrid spot in between those two, and it's got to fall one way or the other because people don't know what to make of it.
Right.
You're probably right. I think that's probably part of the narrative, right? People have to talk about,
you're right too, though. Is if you kind of can see a trajectory of somebody, everybody can be right, like you said.
Yeah, and that just takes that one little avenue out of the equation, one little, but people still have fans. They still, I like this guy, my son has a friend who likes, like I said, Alexa Bliss. we know people who like different wrestlers. So, there's definitely fan base for these wrestlers who will buy their cards.
Mm-hmm.
I got a nice Roman Reigns on eBay right now.
Nice.
SGC 10 blue prism. I think it was at a $199.
Yep.
You'll probably sell for $12
at the rate that you're going. Yeah.
So
let's move over to talking about your show. I mean, you guys have every single day putting a show out, and it's such a variety. Like you have talked wrestling cards, you've talked the housing market, you've talked whatever kind of sports going on. Like that's one thing that I keep going back to your show and why I bought the NFTs, because I wanted to support you guys, because
appreciate that.
Everyday entertainment. What has been something for you that creating content every single day in kind of the collectible space? What's something that you've kind of really taken away from it, as far as like, what it's done for the community, how it's helped your collecting, buying, selling, trading, whatever it is?
Sure. So, I mean, the first takeaway is that we're all a bunch of gambling degenerates. And anybody who says we're not is just lying to themselves right now. I mean, that's what this is all about. And I hope a couple of people listening got a giggle out of that too. We are creatures of habit, right? We want that rush. We want that fun. We want that, that gamble. That's why we open packs. It's why we try to buy cards and hopefully sell them for more. It's why you chase that complete set. We're all a little bit of gamblers. We're all a little bit of hoarders. We're all chasing a time where, things were a little easier for us, chasing a little bit of childhood fun, chasing little memories. Because the hobby is degenerate gamblers, you name it. What I find is, people go back to what they know. People go back to, what they can count on, especially because there are, let's just say, a few actors that can't be counted on. Is that a nice way of putting it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There are those actors everywhere, right? It's in the crypto space, the NFT space, stock market, you name it. There are people going to jail all the time in whatever asset class you want.
Right.
There's frauds all over the place. But I think what we try to do is make sure we're going to be there every day.
Right.
I think it adds a little layer of credibility to us. If we don't put an episode up by like 10 p.m., people start texting me. Everything okay? Like what's going on? Like what's the matter? And I'm like, it's a late night. Like my kid graduated from school. I'm out to dinner. I promise I'll get it up soon. It'll be up. Don't worry, we won't miss a day. We haven't missed one yet. But so I mean, the hobby community is. We all have that kind of like obsessive thread about us, and I think I would go crazy not doing an episode. And I'm not going to lie to you, man. I mean, I don't think I've ever said this on any kind of podcast on our own or anybody. Yes, there are days where the conversation of not doing an episode definitely comes up.
Yeah.
And so far, I just haven't had it. I'm just like, no, I'll do it. I'm like I can always find something to talk about, man. And the biggest fan of the podcast is my wife, because if it wasn't for the podcast, she would have had to have these 720 conversations with me, and she doesn't want to hear about this. So she's just happy I got somebody else to talk to, even if it's just air. It's the folks out there who are listening. So those are the takeaways just from my specific podcast. The other thing about it is this, right? So and please, take this from what it's worth. It's a genuine commentary. It's not me trying to be an ass. If you're in the hobby and you're really looking to grow it, if you're a wrestling fan, if you're a fan of anything, man, a Shaquille O'Neal fan, I see a little Shaq Fu stuff on. I mean, anything, right? Realize that just because you know it doesn't mean everyone knows it. Just because you have had that experience doesn't mean everyone has had that experience. And keep that in mind when you're dealing with people. One of the things that I've learned so much from the podcast is, I go into it with a knowledge base of decades of research and collecting and the whole deal. And sometimes in the beginning, people would ask a question. I'm like, really? That's the question?
Yeah.
And after it got asked a bunch of times, I'm like, holy cow, like people have varying knowledge bases. People have, legitimate questions, and you can't assume that anybody knows anything. Right. And if you want them to stay, you kind of can't be a dick. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be available. You have to help people. You have to be there to answer questions. I mean, I made fun of England. I said Freddy Krueger, I'm sorry, and Dave Peck, and I kind of give them a little. But those guys, they answer questions every day on Twitter, whether it's how much something's worth or where they can find this, the whole deal. It's great that you have those ambassadors. What makes your segment of the hobby grow is more of that, right? And realizing that, anybody who messages you to ask a question or, just to get your feel on things is somebody you could potentially be trading with down the road. Somebody who could potentially pull a card that you need. That's somebody who might run into someone who can get an 82 All-Star autograph that you need for your set. But you just told them, I don't have time for you. You know what I mean? Like, if you treat every interaction that way, not because you want it for yourself, right? But because you want it for the greater good. You want to grow the pie. You want it so that they stay in. Maybe the person who asked me a question stays in and is able to help you out.
Right.
Or maybe they help out, somebody else. Or maybe they bring their kids into the hobby and it just grows the whole user base. It took me a little while doing this content to realize that that's the way you kind of have to approach all of your hobby interactions. Because if people leave the hobby, I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. So that's kind of what I've learned.
Well, last question. And sure. This is so I've been trying to get, and this kind of, you've mentioned a little bit of this, and I think it piggybacks on what we were talking about is growing the pie. I think we need more specific wrestling card content creators, because look at every other avenue of a hobby out there, whether it's Pokemon or F1 or, basketball, baseball, football, entertainment cards. If you go out there, there's people with podcasts, YouTube channels, blogs, or maybe they're just doing Instagram and Twitter. There are people out there that are doing a lot of content within those spaces, but wrestling doesn't really have that. And myself and Tony Vella from WrestlingTradingCards.com and many others, we've been trying to push, hey, like, record with what you have. You don't need the best equipment. You don't need to know what you're doing. Just be passionate about what you want to talk about and just start putting it out there. So what would you have in closing? What words do you have to anybody that I'm trying to get out there to talk about wrestling cards?
Okay, so a couple of things. Number one, I've done 720 episodes on a cracked iPhone 8.
There you go.
So, and I'm doing this show.
Are we doing that right now?
iPhone 8, right? So I am on 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old almost. I might be more than that. iPhone 8 Plus. I don't want to be a liar here. It's a larger screen, so I can see you. But I've literally done. I mean, there might have been a couple where I had to break the computer out. But like, I interviewed Gary V, and my wife called during the interview, and I left the Gary V interview for 10 minutes. Go watch it on YouTube. I'm gone because I'm talking to my wife. Priorities are there, man. I love Gary V. But my wife comes first, right. I mean, it is what it is, right? So, you got to do what you got to do, especially when you're doing your episodes on your phone. So there is literally no bar to putting out content. Beyond that, I didn't know what a podcast was 2 years ago. I was in an Instagram group. People were like, "Oh, Cage, you got great stories. You should do a podcast." And 3 people were like, I'll do a podcast with you. I'll do a podcast with you. And Andrew sent me a Zoom link and said, "Tomorrow, let's record." And we hit record, and we recorded 3 episodes, published them on July 16th of 2020, and haven't stopped. It's really just, it's like what they say about writing, right? Get some words on the page.
Yep.
Just start. Just get your ideas out there. And the other thing I'll tell you is this: the wrestling community is accessible to content. We had Eric Bischoff on our show.
Right.
We interviewed him. Nice guy. Right before he got put into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so if a podcast like ours can go and grab a wrestling Hall of Famer like that, and we're not a wrestling podcast, imagine somebody sat back and just did a wrestling. I mean, does Stacking Slab do more than just wrestling? I thought Brett was.
Brett does a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so I think about it. That's a corner of the content world that you could really just you can make your own. Mm-hmm. And if you become the wrestling podcast, the guests will be there for you. I mean, not to mention, I will tell you that, the people who I've met with the wrestling, fandom and collect, they're different. They're a different breed.
Yeah.
They know the wrestlers, they know, who they like. They can tell you about the shows they went to, the different events. I mean, I think Peck yesterday went to like some local thing in Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who? I looked at the card. I'm like, I don't know any of these people. The women's champ is who? Like, what's the names were like known as, AKA this person.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for someone to say from parts unknown. Like it was one of these like local regional shows. So people don't do that. I mean, there's got to be people out there who are passionate enough about it to go ahead and do that. It doesn't have to be every day. Also, I don't know anybody else who does what I do.
Yeah, you guys are it.
Which is, we're kind of insane.
Yeah.
But I mean, so far it works. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. I'm surprised there isn't somebody who's just doing a solely wrestling podcast. Because obviously, I mean, how many events are there a week? If you count AEW and NXT and WWE. There's got to be almost an episode a day, right? There's almost,
well, and not to mention all the other independents that now use streaming services. So that like wrestling is on all the time. Yeah,
man. So listen, get the tables. Get the tables, man. I mean, there's your podcast name.
Yep.
Go get the tables. Yeah, I mean, the Bills Mafia might have something to say about that, but it is what it is. The table's generated with you guys. It started with you. So, all right, man. I mean, listen, I hope I didn't do too bad of a job here, talking too much, but I love cards. I love talking about the stuff, even though wrestling is not the area that, that I play in as much. I will tell you though, if what you're telling me is true and the prism stuff, like those number things, the golds, the blacks, those ones that traditionally in other sports kind of do hold up. If those come down enough, you're going to have somebody else buying wrestling cards. This guy.
I think a lot of people will. All right. Before we get out of here, let everybody know where they can find you and anything about your podcast you want to plug.
Sure. The podcast, not the easiest name in the world. Probably should have thought about that. It's called Lukas Tigers and Brons Podcast, right? Kind of like Wizard of Oz, like lions, tigers, and bears. My kids came up with it. We are on Instagram at Lukas Tiger LeBron Podcast. I am Cage Lawyer. You can follow me. You can follow my co-host. I am Andrew Goldberg. We are on Whatnot. We do a daily show on Whatnot also from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time.
That's even crazier than the podcast.
So, we sell some stuff. We talk some stuff. We do all that stuff. Andrew's got crazy music. I feel like I'm on drugs in Pakistan sometimes, listening to what he's playing out there. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, I mean, we're Luca Nation on Whatnot. I'm on Twitter, Cage Lawyers, because I know wrestling fans, they're out there doing, mostly on Twitter. And listen, I may not know the answer for you, but, the Disney way will say, if you ever ask a Disney employee a question, they don't say no.
Right.
They either know it or they'll get you the answer. Even if it's wrestling cards, if I know the answer, I'll tell you. If not, I'll get you the answer. And I think, that'll probably help if a lot of the old wrestling ambassadors, the people in the wrestling hobby, take that type of a mindset. If you had a question about cards, whatever it is, send me a message. I don't fall asleep until I answer all my messages, which is sometimes a daunting task, but it is what it is. Yep.
All right. Thanks for coming on, and thank you guys for watching. We'll see you.
Of course, brother. Thanks. This was fun.
Thanks again to Cage for coming on the show and giving his time to the Wrestling with Cards community. I sincerely hope that you were able to take something away from this conversation and apply it to how you do the hobby, specifically wrestling cards. Make sure to go check out the Lukas Tigers and Brons podcast. Now, I know it's a little bit more sports-centric, mainstream topic, so to speak, but again, we talked about in this interview, they cover everything. They run the gamut of topics. Again, wrestling, real estate, golf, tennis, baseball, basketball, football, Andrew's random escapades. You never know what they're going to talk about in there. And they're going to show up for you each and every day, providing you free content daily. You can't beat that. So show these guys some support. I'll put the links in the show notes to Cage's social media, and as well as links to the Lukas Tigers and Brons podcast. And while you're there, make sure to check out all the other links I have down there of ways you can help show your support for my channel, for this video, whether it's monetary, whether it's just sharing it on social media, and it doesn't matter. We're just looking for engagement and to get more community building and just more people talking about wrestling cards. So again, share this video with anybody you think that would be interested. Please subscribe before you get out of here if you haven't already, and give me a like. And then I said before you get out of here, please click the videos on the screen for more great wrestling card content. I'll see you next time, pal.